everyone. It's Mirela Ciobanu, lead editor with the papers, and I'm about to speak with Mike Haley, who is CEO of leading fraud prevention service Cifas, and we are going to talk about the threat landscape and how our businesses and consumers impacted about it. We are going to find out if businesses are prepared for this and what solutions are restored. But without further ado, let's start. Mike, so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. Yes, and great to be on the show. On the show, I guess we call it a show, Mirella.
Yeah. So actually, we had several interviews on preventing fraud. So we can call it, a continuation of our educational content in this space. Okay, so first let's see. Tell us a bit about Cifas for those who do not know it yet. And I'm also curious about your professional background, how and your experience, how does it tie into Cifas' mission and vision?
Okay. Well, you've got me on my two favorite topics, so it would take me a while. So let's paint the picture. Cifas is a UK only, at this moment, fraud prevention service. We've been going for 38 years now, and we're a not-for-profit membership organisation with nearly 800 what we call members. And those members include, in the UK, all the retail banks, e-retailers, insurers, telecoms, and a growing number in the fintech and payments industry. And I guess the thing I really put about that not-for-profit is that we're a mission-driven organization. We focus on reducing the harms caused by fraud, and we do that through facilitating the sharing of fraud data across those members. So we do two important things in the UK. We maintain the national fraud database and the insider threat databases, and these are data consortia where our members are obliged to put their fraud cases onto these databases. So we call it that on the basis of reciprocity, that or as our South African colleagues, because we have a sister organization in South Africa, say that you have to bring your own meat to the barbie, in that if you want to get the protection of all the data that our members provide, you also have to bring your meat to the barbecue. So what it covers, basically 6 case types in the National Fraud Database: account opening fraud, that's keeping bad actors out; identity fraud; account takeover fraud; and misuse of facilities; and then some work on insurance fraud with very specific and asset finance. And the second thing we do is that we provide a secure peer-to-peer platform for members to communicate to each other and to perform inter-member checks. And the beauty of this, that we can see how effective it is, because last year alone, our members reported to us that the use of the Cifas data saved £2.1 billion in fraud losses. So it's a very effective data sharing and a very mature data sharing scheme. And we might come back to how that might be replicated elsewhere. But you asked me a second question, your follower, a rider, about my I guess my professional career. And you can see the grey in my beard now, Mirella, since when you last saw me, I didn't have the beard. But the beard is showing grey because it's a long and varied career, both fighting fraud, but also as a regulator, regulating illegal conduct by professionals and businesses. And it crosses the public and private sector. And if I think back to the start of my career, I cut my teeth as a customs officer investigating fraud, and I spent 7 or 8 years learning about different types of fraud and how to investigate them. I then worked in a local council and our NHS counter fraud authority, and I think it was there at the NHS where I was taken under the wing of the then CEO, Jim G, to come to the headquarters. So I was working in investigations and then come to the headquarters and think about fraud more strategically. How could we learn the lessons from investigations to prevent more fraud? How could we improve detection? So, for example, I introduced the whistleblowing line in the NHS to encourage more reporting. My next kind of most important role was at the Office of Fair Trading, where I was the Director of Consumer Protection. And there I created the mass marketing scams team. Now we call that authorized push payment fraud. And since faster payments, it's been a huge issue. But scams have always been around. And it used to be different delivery mechanisms. But in those days, email was first coming out and spam was a huge problem. And I worked internationally to combat spam and scams. Um, from there, I then used that experience at the what was then a newly formed National Fraud Authority, where I led cross agency work to tackle big fraud issues like identity fraud, like scams, like mortgage fraud. And then about 10 years ago, to get to the point, I arrived here at Cifas, 3 years as deputy and 7 years as the CEO. So putting those together, I think that how does that background shape how I see fraud? I think might be kind of an interesting thing to explore. Is that first of all, that long experience in investigation then made me consider how you don't want to keep on investigating the same frauds. You want to prevent them. Prevention, particularly at fraud at scale, is hugely important. Secondly, I learned that we need to bring public and private sector organizations together to combat fraud. And thirdly, the necessity to share data, intelligence, and knowledge. In every organization I worked, people would always say, if only we shared earlier more data and intelligence. And that's why I think Cifas is such a great fit for me personally. And I think its mission is so, so important at this time when fraud is such a global problem.
Yeah. So I liked a lot in your answer here that you constantly use this idea of learning lessons, learning from experience, learning from a specific space. And I also liked the part where you talk about this efficiency. So, not doing things for the sake of doing them. So, doing things that are really, they show really value and practical results. So, I like these two parts. And since you also, yeah, mentioned the mission and vision of, yeah, sharing data and also this collaboration public private, I have a feeling that the Global Anti Scam Summit London in 2025 that just happened was about some of these topics. Can you, yeah, share some of the takes from this event and its
Yeah,
connection with Cifas?
certainly. I guess kind of personally, we've been looking at, I've kind of in my mind, when I talk to people about data sharing and intelligence sharing, there's kind of a maturity model that first of all, companies weren't sharing inside a company or an organization the fraud threats they faced. And there's a level of maturity to start sharing that, say, across a bank or a payments organization or a government department. Then there comes a degree of maturity about sharing within a sector. Say all insurance companies started to share, or banks. The third element of maturity is where we've got to about sharing across sectors. But fraud and scams are a global issue. So the next level of maturity is being able to share across border, which is a very difficult thing to do. But the scale of fraud, and this is one of the big takeaways, the scale of fraud on an international issue. It's an international issue in so many countries. I mean, a scary figure that the more than 1 trillion, according to the Global Anti-Scams organization GASA, globally in 2024, 1 trillion. I mean, that's a huge amount of money that could go into developing economies, protecting individuals, providing new services. So a good takeaway is that we weren't kind of alone. I think before we looked at only the UK and said, oh, we got a fraud problem. We have about 40% of crime in the UK is fraud. But in Singapore, it's 50%. And in Australia and Taiwan and other countries, it's suddenly become much more of an issue. So therefore, we have a commonality. We've got a common issue. So I think that was the thing, the scale of the issue, and it's global. Secondly, we learned from many examples that organized crime gangs are now on a significant scale. If you think of the scam factories, we had examples of scam factories in Southeast Asia and West Africa. Some of that is linked to modern days, well, no, not modern days, to slavery and people trafficking,
Exactly, yeah.
and trapping the vulnerable at computers. It's a kind of a modern way of slavery, and then to create purchase scams, to create all types of investment scams, romance frauds. So we've got scam factories. We've got a international division of labor. So West Africa, we've got romance frauds come out. We've got, like in some parts of Eastern Europe, like Albania, we have certain more technical frauds. And then, say, Southeast Asia, kind of purchase scams type one. International division with very specific ways. And then lastly, I think the rapid technological change, and we will come back to AI, I'm sure, is supercharging the threat and the reach of these global criminals. So the big takeaway for me was there's absolutely urgent and necessitous to build a global fraud fighting community. So we built one in the UK, but it needs to be, we can't fight fraud on our own in the UK. We can, because it's global. So we need to be part of that process. So we were so happy to partner with the global anti-scams guys from the Netherlands, who are now global, to start bringing together the London summit, but also participate. We participated the GASA Americas and GASA in Asia. So I think that, if we're going to effectively tackle fraud on a global level, we need these type of global organizations.
Yeah, and besides this type of events, Cifas has also other types of activities aiming to, unite fraud fighters and educate the space. And one of these activities is reporting. So you
Yes.
have every year and 6 months a report, the Fraudscape that Cifas is launching. And I'm curious to learn for regarding the latest editions. What are, the latest threats that you are uncovering? Most probably are related to those six types of frauds that you mentioned in the beginning. What are the most vulnerable groups in terms of businesses, consumers?
Mm.
So to unpack more about your reports.
Yeah. So last year we had 424,000 fraud cases, individual fraud cases, 1,000 a day. Every 2 minutes, a fraud case is put on to our databases. So that's really useful information to share. But it also gives us unprecedented insight into a changing fraud landscape. We can see some of the trends. We can see where fraud's growing and in which areas. So what's the headlines from that? So we've just issued a report on the last 6 months, or January to June. So the most up-to-date picture of what's happening to fraud based on those cases. And in that 6 months, there were 217,000 fraud cases placed onto the database. That is the highest number in any 6-month period ever. So what is evident is that fraud is continuing to grow. And when we dig deeper into some of those cases, we see a number of themes. I think that economic pressures, so first party fraud, increasing. That is individual consumers lying and being deceitful or deceptive around getting products, services, payments. We see increasing risky consumer behavior, that they're taking more risks and being hard and loose with their credentials, with their identities. And we see scalable AI, which is outpacing traditional defenses. So we are definitely seeing quite a lot of highly believable created documents, identity documents, utility bills, passports, driving licenses, and them to be able to create fabricated AIs, synthetic identities. So identity fraud is still the highest number of frauds. It's 118,000, but the percentage is starting to drop. So it used to be around 60%. This last 6 months is around 50%. You see, well, just over 50%. And a rising concern we've seen in identity fraud is individuals who are willing to sell their own identities to criminals for financial gain, because they can use those identities, because it's so hard to detect with all the levels when it's a genuine identity. It's the genuine person that seems to be applying, making a payment or applying for a new account. So that's a rising concern, because those individuals are exposing themselves to identity loss and liability for fraudulent loans and cards, everything. They've been taking out accounts, but they're doing it for short-term gain. They might be in dire straits. So identity fraud, the biggest, but kind of stable. What we've seen is a jump in account takeover and what we call misuse of facilities. Misuse of facility includes things like money muling and the misuse of an account, non-payments of accounts. Misuse of facility is now about a quarter of all the cases, and that rose 35% over the same period last year. So that's kind of a notable increase. And facility or account takeover, this is more of a sophisticated criminal attack where where a criminal has got the credentials to be able to take over someone's account. We see that in telecoms, plastic cards, any payments area. That's now 20% of all cases. So I think the kind of summary of what we've seen in the last 6 months is fraud has reached the highest levels of reported fraud, but we've seen a noticeable shift from identity fraud to account takeover and a misuse of an existing facility. And it's interesting to see why that's come about, but it may be that identity fraud is harder to open an account might be coming harder. There might be better barriers in place, therefore trying to attack someone whose account is already open and fool them into giving up their credentials. So that's kind of the general pattern we're seeing in the UK.
Yeah, and I was curious because I skimmed the report. You mentioned the individuals that are more willing to sell their data to commit fraud, or you talk also about these money mules. Do you have any data about the demographics of these people? I don't know in terms of ages, digital saviness.
Yeah. I mean, it's on money mules. It tends to be a younger population that are being targeted. So we see the opposite, say, in credit fraud, where a criminal will want to take over someone's, like identity fraud, to take over someone who's more mature, who has a better credit history, and then you can take out more credit in their name. Whereas for money mules, they're deliberately targeting younger people. We have seen some shift into kind of what more middle-aged people, actually, which is kind of interesting. And that might be to do with economic necessity, that some people feel that this is a quick way. They might be responding to the types of hooks that mule herders, those who try to recruit money mules, place on social media to say you can make money quick, you can make money from home, you can make money in a way which is safe from home, but actually you're allowing your bank account to be used for money to be transferred into under a whole range of ruses, like we just set up a business in Romania, but we haven't got anyone local, so can we use your account? And it's all above board. So some people are being duped into this, and other people know exactly what they're doing. But we definitely see a younger demographic, including as young as 14 or below, when they get their first accounts. And we see, yes, school children, students being targeted. Some people have naivety, some people are being exploited and being targeted and pressured into allowing their cards or their bank accounts to be used for money mule accounts.
Yeah.
But don't get me wrong, there are people from all ages who are allowing their accounts to be used.
It's interesting how this idea of pressure works, because you also talked about these organized gangs in Asia that are forcing, in a way, people into those call centers to commit fraud. And the same here, in a way, they are induced or they are seduced with potential.
I think there's two great words, Mirella: induced or seduced. So I do think that there are people more naive and can get seduced, and there are people who are induced by the material rewards. And some people do this with their eyes open, and many people have their eyes closed. I think some people, I think it's like the three monkeys. Some people got their fingers in their ear. They know what they're doing, but they don't really want to hear. Other people don't see what's going on, and other people are just taken in by the words and the overtures.
And since seduction is not such a, let's say, technical word or easy to detect by technology, I'm curious, what do you think? Are businesses prepared to detect these types of frauds and to fight against these types of things that we're seeing? Yeah. What are the tools in place for them?
So I think that's a very interesting point, but let me kind of first tackle the question: Are organizations being effective? Are they prepared for? I think they are prepared for the types of crime where someone's trying to take over your account or impersonate you more, because there's such a range of solutions. We have quite a lot in our armory, or companies do have. We have device reputation software to identify what's the whether an account is being accessed from an unusual device or location. We have behavioral analysis that can tell whether it's a bot that is that's coming to it or whether it's me, and looking at patterns and anomalous patterns in an online session. We have biometric identification, verification, we have multi-factor authentication, machine learning tools in place. So I think there's kind of a whole range, and all the data we have, range of data and tools. And the challenge there is how we orchestrate them. But to your point, because there's those tools, we now see more practiced social engineering to attack the weakest link, which is the human.
Exactly. Hmm.
And therefore that evades all those things we put in place. Does this look like a bot? No, it looks like a human. Does it look like the human that we've had that's been in this online session before? Yes, it does. They behave in the same way. Are they in the same location? Yes. So all those factors that are put in to identify that kind of organized crime attack, a normal human being walks through them because they are expected. They behave in this way. Maybe the transaction modeling and transaction monitoring is the issue there. But people can be seduced, can be persuaded. They could be vulnerable. They give up their credentials. They get a phishing email which looks like it comes from the genuine payment service provider, and they respond. And only afterwards they go, "Oh, was that really from them?" But by that time they've given up those credentials and it's too quick. They get phone calls pretending to be banks. So I think that we've got to see that the criminal has become quite sophisticated in how to manipulate, and and what type of approaches are successful. So I think it's a really good question. How do you protect and detect those? And there are new techniques and coming through around specifically around the transaction, and does it look out of character compared to other transactions for the individual? But we also know that when the individual is scammed, they kind of come under the spell of a fraudster, and it's quite hard to break that spell. The bank will speak to them, police will speak to them, and they believe that they're being
Yeah.
told. So it has to be, for me, the education goes so far and awareness, but for those people who are under a spell, it needs to be more technological means of being able to identify when the transaction. So, for example, something we've introduced in the UK is called beneficiary checks, enabling one of our members to connect with another member to see what's the reputation of the destination account. So if I have, say I'm initiating the payment and it looks slightly risky, out of the ordinary, but I don't know anything about the account it's going to and whether that's a risky account. So the beneficiary checks allows the members to check what's the reputation. Are you expecting this type of payment? What's happened to this account? How long's it been opened? So bringing those who have the mule accounts and those who've got the customer account together, I think, is a very important way. And the second thing we're doing is creating a database of victims, because we know from research that 60% of a victim of a scam becomes re-victimized. So we need to share
Oh,
that information so that
60%.
60% they
More
come
than
back
half.
again and again. So if they find that you're weak, you're vulnerable, that you have been seduced into one fraud, they will then find all your accounts, your savings accounts, your bank account, and they will wipe you out one by one, because they use different techniques. There's something called a reloading scam, where they will come back, and because they know all the money that you've lost and who from, they will pretend to be the police and say, "Oh, Mirella, did you lose £50,000 from your Santander account?" "Yes, I did." "Oh, was it on this date and this date and this date?" "Yes, it was." "Well, we've got that money. We've been able to interdict it, but you need to send us another €250 to release that funds." So here you're like, "Oh, you've been persuaded it's a police officer, they know everything
Yeah.
about you, and you're tantalizingly close to getting your money back, but then you have to pay some more." So they're very sophisticated in this. We call that a reloading scam. Um, so yeah, sharing this information, looking at transactions modeling, and having effective means for payment providers to know the reputation of the destination account, I think, are the types of new solutions that we need to have adopted more widely.
Yeah, you mentioned beneficiary checks and yeah, new solutions and consumers protected. Now we switch a bit gears and focus a bit on regulation, because beneficiary checks in a way got me to verification of pay, let's say.
Mm.
And we have the PSD3 verification of pay and whatnot. And also, yeah, regarding this data sharing, as you mentioned, it's difficult when it's cross jurisdiction because of data privacy law. And again, you mentioned that during your experience, you are also in the shoes of the regulator. So
Yes.
I'm curious, with all these regulations and your experience, how can we see this topic? Something like an enabler or as a burden or a
Gosh.
combination of both?
It's a really good question. I think, both regulators and the industry think about this a lot, because sometimes regulation misses the point, can't it? It can be counterproductive. It certainly doesn't keep up with the pace of technology. So we end up with regulation which has already been surpassed. However, I think some of the current sets of regulations, PSD3, verification of payee, I think on balance with the amount of fraud there is largely beneficial. So we talked about transaction monitoring. Transaction monitoring has been long established amongst banks and payments, but becoming mandatory across all payments must be a good thing in terms of identifying when something looks anomalous. If you then have a sharing of that signal, then I think we start making good good making good for the customer. Likewise, extending secure customer authentication, that must be a good thing. Now, on verification of payee, we've had what we call confirmation of payee in the UK for quite some time now. Let's be clear, it's a layer. It's a useful addition, but it's not a silver bullet. It helps make sure that payments are made to the correct payee, but often with the dynamic messaging in place, people click through and then just say, I'm happy to pay this. So it's another addition, and I think it's useful and it should be widely adopted. I guess two big things, and we do have more experience in the UK that are coming in with PSD. I think, secondly, the extension of liability for impersonation scams. So the things we were talking about earlier around someone phones up and pretends to be from your bank, for example. I think that consumers will welcome the fact that if they have been conned that way, they won't be liable. But for me, it's just too narrow in its coverage, because scammers do not just impersonate banks or a payment provider, they also impersonate a courier, a police officer, a government official. And it seems to me we're creating a two-tier system where it would be in my advantage to pretend something happened that didn't, i.e. it was the bank that called me, but how do I prove that? I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think it's just far too narrow, and I think that consumer groups will want to say that there should be reimbursement on the extension of liability for impersonation scams across the board. But it's a step in the right direction. And for me, the really exciting thing is that the expansion of the ability of PSPs to share data on fraud-related events, such as fraudulent IBANs, on different modus operandi, different methods, and that being clearly in line with GDPR and the law, because I think there's a lot of nervousness about sharing across organizations and across borders. I think this has the potential to foster cross-sector collaboration with telcos, big tech, and across borders. When it comes to AI, it's clearly a significant part of the evolving problem. And we've seen a huge increase in AI being used by fraudsters. Around 7% of those identity frauds, there's an AI footprint.
70%.
7% of the current identity frauds. But some sort of AI-enabled models are across 43% of all those cases. But I do think agentic AI being used as a fraud prevention tool has a lot of promise. And the reason is because you need an adaptive tool, a tool that can look at how fraud is changing and how actually AI is being used and respond in an adaptive way, and to go from a kind of reactive way to a proactive stance. So I think that these new tools that are being created by companies using AI hold some promise. And I think, we talked before about the fact that that you have ways to spot patterns with transaction monitoring, but remember there's like millions and millions of data points, so you need and it's impossible for humans to see that needle in the haystack and to see the different patterns. We have machine learning models now, but I think this takes it a step further to be able to detect very quickly and then see those patterns, do regression analysis and say, this is how the fraud looks, this is how we can see it earlier. So I think that I'm looking forward to seeing how that. I said we spoke earlier about an arms race. So they're using AI. We need to use AI and put it into our armory, and we need to keep up with that. So we will have AI bots being used by fraudsters for attacks at scale, and we need AI that are spotting those attacks at scale. and stopping them. What's kind of more interesting to me is this kind of whole possibility of personal agents, that that I could have my own agentic AI, and it has access to all my diaries and bank accounts, and it can start acting for me. So what happens if my agentic AI, Mike Haley's Dual, says I need a new account opened, or I need a new loan, for example, and then it starts hallucinating by saying that I'm earning more than I have because it thinks that's the best way to get the loan. So I've not instructed it to do that, but it's thought it's in my best interest to show some deception around getting a new product or service or loan, or to make a transaction. Who now liable? Is it the who wrote the agent? Is it the prompts I put in? At the end of the day, I get the loan and I must have signed or give a digital signature to something. So I don't think liability will shift, but I think that we're entering a new era, a brave new world, where in the not too distant future, many people were using these agents will be acting on their behalf, and they will show all of the issues that we have with AI: bias, hallucinations, trying to do what they think is best for the individual without checking in. So I kind of look forward to case law on that, because I don't think I have a view about liability. I think we're going to get to who's liable in those circumstances. It traditionally is a contract for that service or a mandate for that payment, and it's me who's liable. But I'll be pointing at my machine and saying, but I never instructed it to do this. So yeah, a brave new world to come.
Yeah. And probably we'll start experiencing more social engineering at bot level. Bots tricking into other bots, or
Yeah.
convincing them, seducing, inducing you pick the word in here,
Yeah.
into committing fraud. Yeah, we're now at the end of our discussion, and I was curious if you feel that there might be some points that haven't been raised so far, or you want to end up with a message for our financial audience in terms of getting ready for what's coming next. If you think about all these transformations happening, starting from geopolitics, also in payments, in technology, what would be some closing thoughts,
Oh yeah, I think
takeaway?
that there's so many things we could still discuss, Mirella, but I think there are three or four takeaways. I think the first one around, globally in different countries, we've got to start collaborating, sharing information about latest trends, and seeing that we're all on the same side against global scammers. I think secondly, in the UK, we do have established data sharing schemes which have protected banks for decades, and we are open to fintechs and payment organizations. So if you're in the UK and you're not a member, come and speak to us, or even better, go and speak to a PSP or a fintech that already is in membership to see what benefits are. I think, thirdly, the growing threat of fraud plus regulatory change means that there needs to be mechanisms put in across Europe. So it's all very good having the law or having regulation, but there needs a mechanism. How are we going to share data to prevent fraud across borders in a legal and secure manner? So I'd like to see how that kind of works out, and we're very open to sharing our experience in the UK with any group who are looking to be able to facilitate sharing. And we're already sharing our experience with the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland about how they could have a shared fraud database. And lastly, this is the call to action, really, that there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of solutions, and if you're not quite sure about how you orchestrate them, how do you arrange those in the right way, and what layers, what data points do you have, there are lots of good fraud professionals who are available to advise and make sure that you keep your fraud under control, reduce your false positives, and enable you to do your business in a safe and secure manner.
Yeah, great. Thank you that you ended up with this. So we talked a lot about technology and AI, but we ended up with this touch of, we need professionals, because, we have good professionals in the industry that help us, cope with all this, how they say, tsunami of threats that is on us. Thank you,
Yes.
Mike, for today's discussion. I was seduced by it. I mean, just taking notes here, and I'm sure that our audience is going to enjoy it. And we welcome their feedback. So we look forward to maybe part two to our interview.
So certainly, thank you, Mirella.